Hey everybody, welcome to another kind of lesson slash check-in on COVID. We've talked about Italy and the United States and the growth rates, and we've talked about how to turn our exponential modeling of growth rates into piecewise functions, which is important because, it's not going to be pure exponential growth. The curve is going to taper off. We're seeing that in the United States. That's what we noticed last time. This time what we're going to do is we're going to start to look at more local stuff because this is really important. This is where we live. So we're going to be looking at Santa Clara County data. So I'd like to invite you to come take a look here. First of all, this comes from Santa Clara County Public Health. Little caveat, this is not perfect data. There's still definitely lag in testing. There are people at home who don't know if they have it. But what I really appreciated was that they actually were able to, if you can zoom in right in here, they're actually able to turn it into a table. So we see that Friday, January 31st will be when we had one case. But what we see is that basically it wasn't until February 28th that we really started to have cases coming along. And at first, of course, it's a slow crawl. And then starts to get up. Okay, we cracked 100 on March 15th. And we're in 300. And today is the day that we crack 1,000. So if you talk to a lot of people, they'll say, oh my gosh, it's 1,000. The largest point I want to impress upon you is that the raw number is not as important as the rate of growth. So we're going to take a look over here on Desmos. I've been modeling this. As we can see here, we have the USA and Italy. For our purposes, obviously, Santa Clara is going to be a lot lower because there's just a lot less people. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison, but I have plotted all of the Santa Clara data in here. So, from day one, and there is a lot of historical data. We've been getting more stuff coming back. So on day 35, which is yesterday, April Fool's Day, 956. Let's go with a more reasonable scale. That seems is pretty good. And I'd have to say it does kind of map a pretty fair facsimile of an exponential curve. We're going to take the Italy and USA data out of here. We're going to take a look at this. As we try to model this data, what we're going to notice is that our day 1 was 1 case, and our day 35 was 956 cases. So what I did is I said, well, 956 is equal to 1, the base value, times x, the unknown growth value, to the power of 35. And as we zoom in on that, we're going to see that that is approximately a growth value of 1.217. 1.217. I went way in there. I saw 1.217. So I used y equals 1.217 to the x. You may be thinking, where's the a value? Well, technically the a value there is 1 because we're starting from a first case of 1. So let's make that one active. I'm going to make it orange. And we're going to look at it against our data set. So again, we're going from day 0 to, let's say, day 40. So we do a little projection. And our y-axis will go from 0 cases up to 1,000 cases. And at first look, yeah, it does fit pretty well. It fits at the beginning, and importantly, it fits at the end. But here's the thing. Every single outlier is above the curve. What that means is that at these times previously, the rate was higher than it is now. And it was trending as if it would be a steeper curve, and the curve is, as we say, the curve is flattening. So that's great. What that leads to, in terms of my perspective on modeling, what I want you to keep in mind, is that we should probably not just act like day 0 and day 35 are the only data points we can use to model this exponentially. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to apply a piecewise view of it. So let's just look at the first 7 days. And let's do y equals 1, the initial value, times 1.5 to the x for days 0 through 7. Fits pretty well. Fits pretty well. Again, I'm trying to make sure that I match all the points. I can't match them all perfectly, so I'm going to miss a little on day 4 and day 7. But since they're on opposite sides of the line, it's a pretty decent model. As you can see, this is actually worse rate than our 1.217 line, which at this point, you'd say that we were actually growing faster than that. All right, so then our next 7 days, we start with 14 because that was the number of cases on day 7. We're going to go with about a 1.2. Now, this is an estimation, but we're basically looking visually to see how well we track. It's x minus 7 because we're starting translated 7 to the right for a domain of days 7 through 14. Let's get a look. And it fits pretty well. It's maybe a little low. Can maybe go 1.21, 0.22 maybe. Yeah, that's a pretty decent fit right there, 1.22. So it's under sometimes, but it's also over at the end. And critically, we are now creating some distance. We are now, at this point, we were doing worse than the 1.217 that we used to model the entire space. Okay, week 3, we start at 48 because that's the value we actually had on day 14. We're going to bring it down to a 1.2 rate, which is slightly lower. We're translating, of course, 14 days to the right. That's why it's x minus 14, and using the domain days 14 through 21. And we're tracking, and it's pretty good, but again, yeah, it's a little low. Let's adjust. Yeah, that seems pretty good. What I would say is that it seems like in these 2 weeks that we had approximately a 1.22 growth rate, which is a pretty steep growth rate. But it's always worse on the front end and better on the back end, which means even within this piece, there's a flattening tendency where it's less pronounced at the end and more pronounced at the beginning. We move into the next week. This is week 4, starting on day 21. We were creating quite a lot of distance above that 1.217 growth rate. So for a while, we're really doing worse than that. And we moved to day 21. I modeled this with a 1.14, which is only a 14% daily growth rate, which is lower. And we'll get a look here. It tracks extremely well. It basically splits the data. Some are above, some are below. But basically it fits really well. And as you may notice, we are coming closer to that 1.217 line. So in a way, yeah, it's showing that we are actually coming back towards that and flattening the curve as we speak. Now we're on to week 5, starting on day 28 and taking us up to today. And I used 459, the start value, 1.11, which is an 11% daily growth rate. And we're going to find that it fits the data set really well and takes us right up to today. As we get to today, we see that, yeah, basically we've modeled it fairly well. Let's look at the overall picture here. We're going to go again from day 0 up to, we'll do day 40. And we'll go from 0 to 1,000 cases at first. 0 to 1,000. And I would say that the piecewise model tracks the dots extremely well, whereas the other model, which I'll now model in red, has a lot of gap away from our data set. As we move forward, we know that we're going to get more cases. And as you can tell, there's an upward trend no matter how you look at it. But this is where you're going to start to see the real understanding. All right, I'm going to change my wrench value. I'm going to move up to 10,000 cases. And I'm going to try to take it out to day 50. And let's see where we're headed. So you see, by day 50, the red model, the one that kind of had a global sense that we were going at a 21.7 daily growth rate, has us shooting up very fast around day 50. But what I want to notice is that if we look at the way our growth rate has been going from 1.5 to 1.22, 1.22, 1.14, 1.11, it's decreasing. It's decreasing every time, except for the one time it stayed the same, but it never has increased. So I'm proposing that if we continue to shelter in place, if we continue to get a little bit better, and I'm not talking about a lot, I'm talking about a 1% weekly decrease. So we go from 1.11 to 1.1. We'll see that it makes a big difference. If you come in really close, you're going to see that we're way below the red curve here. Now I'm going to graph this just to show. The red curve has us a week from now with 3,800 cases in a week. Whereas if we can just shave 1% off from our current trend, we have 1,800. That's a difference of 2,000 cases. Come in close one more time, please. From there, if we can continue to drop just 1%, so down to 1.09, we can model like this, showing us at day 49, 2 weeks from now, having 3,400 cases, which, yes, it's a lot, and yes, it's still growing. But compare that to where we would be, 15,000 cases. If nothing else, this needs to show you the value of flattening the curve. That as we can continue to just grow by a slower and slower rate, we're going to end up a lot better off. That 1.217, we started off actually at a worse rate than that. And if we were maintaining that, we'd be in a lot of trouble. But here we are, we're down to 1.11 in the last week. And if we can continue to lower that, we will reach our peak. No way to say for sure, but we will reach our peak. Seemingly somewhere out here. Maybe 6,000 cases. It's hard to say, but we're going to flatten and flatten. If we can continue to flatten, we're not going to end up with stratospheric numbers. So, anecdotally, my mother-in-law walked the dogs last night. Saw a family having a birthday party, lots of people in the house. And I mean, you know, kids want to have their birthday parties. But that's the kind of thing that can cause us to have spikes in the growth rate. That's the kind of thing that can really make for the worst case scenario. Nationwide, they're saying if everybody does the shelter in place, if everybody does it right, we're going to have 100,000 to 200,000 people dying of this disease. We can't afford to be undisciplined right now, okay? There's a number of people even around here who haven't been tested, okay? So we can't play around with this. But I do encourage you to model this, track it day by day, and we'll continue to adjust the growth rate with our model and just see how we're doing, see if we're able to make good sense of what's taking place. All right, everybody. Thanks a lot for watching. Take care. Be smart. Share this information with other people because we really have to look out for everybody and do the right thing. Thanks a lot.